No place for failures. That was how my brother welcomed me on Christmas Eve, his frame filling the doorway as if guarding something precious behind him. The tree shimmered softly in the background, lights reflecting off the ornaments like silent witnesses. My mother held her glass of wine tightly, her knuckles pale, while my father stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I stood there clutching a bag filled with carefully chosen gifts for their children, the weight of weeks of thought suddenly meaningless beneath my brother's smug grin, the look of someone who finally believed he'd won. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply said, "You're right." Then I turned away, and that night I made a quiet decision, one that froze every payment keeping his family comfortable. By the time the new year rolled around, he was the one standing at my door. Stay with me, and I'll tell you how it all began. Once I used to love Christmas. I loved the glow of lights along the windows, the scent of cinnamon candles that filled the air, and the hush of falling snow that made even the ugliest corners of our street seem tender. It was the one day I could pretend we were normal, that we were a family held together by love instead of obligation. But illusions never last forever. Ours cracks slowly, quietly, like thin ice spreading fractures beneath your feet before it finally gives way. Growing up, I was the fixer, the dependable one. If a bill came late, I covered it. If someone needed a ride, I was already halfway out the door. When my brother Ethan and his wife Nora struggled with their mortgage, I sent money before they could even ask. I called it kindness back then, though sometimes it felt more like guilt or a desperate attempt to be seen as the reliable daughter, the one who kept the family from falling apart. My parents encouraged it, praising me with words that sounded like pride, but carried the relief of people who didn't want to deal with the mess themselves. My mother often smiled and said, "You've always been the responsible one." But her tone was more thankful than affectionate. My father never said much. He simply handed Ethan another plate, another favor, another excuse. And so I kept giving: school tuition paid, utility bills cleared, job losses patched with quiet transfers. It was easier to pay than to fight. They called it help, but it wasn't. It was a system of control, one I didn't even realize I'd been feeding. Every time I saved them, I tied myself tighter to their approval. That's how love works in my family. Generosity as a leash, affection as a treat dangled just out of reach. But this year I wanted something different. I had planned everything. Bought thoughtful gifts, taken time off work, even baked my grandmother's sugar cookies. I pictured laughter, warmth, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, I got Ethan's smirk and my mother's silence. No place for losers. Those words didn't just sting. They rearranged something deep inside me. On the drive home, my car felt heavier than ever. The wrapped presents glowed faintly in the passenger seat, mocking reminders of how foolish I'd been. By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, I wasn't crying. I was calm, a strange, frightening calm. For the first time, I saw it clearly. I hadn't been part of a family in years. I'd been part of a machine that ran on my silence and my sacrifice. That night, the silence I'd kept for so long began to sound like something entirely new. I didn't sleep. The words replayed again and again. No place for losers. Each repetition sharper, more final. Ethan had mocked me before, but never like that, not with everyone watching. What hurt most wasn't his tone, but the stillness around it. My mother saying nothing, my father's eyes fixed on the floor. Their silence said what they were too cowardly to voice. They agreed with him. Morning came gray and bitter. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the list I'd written weeks earlier. Christmas budget, gifts, shipping receipts, school payments. My handwriting looked foreign, the frantic scrawl of someone trying to buy affection one transaction at a time. I traced each line, realizing that my life had been built around Ethan's comfort. Every emergency payment I'd made had been another withdrawal from my own stability. Then something shifted. Not anger, something quieter, deeper. Exhaustion. The kind that arrives when you finally understand the rules of a game you never agreed to play. I opened my laptop, scrolling through my accounts. Transfer after transfer, each labeled like a confession: tuition, daycare, groceries, utilities. I stared at the numbers, the quiet proof of how I'd been used. Then without a word I began to end them. Cancel. 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 One by one I erased every automatic payment. Took 5 minutes to undo 5 years. I waited for guilt. It never came. Instead, I felt lighter. The apartment seemed quieter, the air softer somehow. I poured a second cup of coffee, stronger this time, and stood by the window watching snowflakes dance beneath the streetlights. For once, I wasn't thinking about who needed what or what I had to fix. I was thinking about boundaries, how beautiful they sound when you finally draw one. By midday, I packed every Christmas gift into storage boxes and sealed them shut. I couldn't throw them away, not yet, but I couldn't look at them either. Each ribbon and tag felt like evidence from a long personal crime. That afternoon, Ethan's text arrived. You could have at least dropped off the presents. The kids are waiting. I looked at the message for a long time before replying with a single word, no. He answered almost instantly. What's your problem? My fingers hovered above the screen, then fell still. I didn't reply. Let him wonder. Let him feel the quiet for once. His silence lasted barely 2 days. On the third morning, my phone lit up in a storm: calls, texts, voicemails. First, they sounded polite. Hey, what's going on? Then desperate. The rent's due. The kids need shoes. Finally, angry. You're selfish. You've changed. I didn't answer any of them. I just watched the notifications stack up, one after another. Proof that my value to them had always been measured in money. When I left for work that morning, the city lay beneath a new layer of snow. It was cold but stunning. A reminder that even the harshest things can appear pure when untouched. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop again. The glow illuminated line after line, years of transactions, transfers, and quiet sacrifices. Every payment I had ever made for Ethan and Nora's family scrolled endlessly across the screen. A testament to a past I was finally ready to stop funding. Mortgage payments, school contributions, utility bills, camp fees. All of it lined up like a record of misplaced loyalty. As I looked at the list, the familiar blend of pity and resentment rose inside me. But this time I didn't force it back down. Instead, I printed every page. The paper slid out of the machine warm and faintly scented with ink, the smell of something ending. Then I called the bank to confirm every single cancellation. When the final representative said, "All done," I felt something lift. I even changed my online passwords, a small yet symbolic act, like closing a door that had been left open for far too long. That Friday, Ethan appeared at my office unannounced. No text, no warning. Just stormed in, face flushed and damp from the cold. "We need to talk," he hissed through clenched teeth. My coworkers froze mid-motion, their eyes flicking between us, unsure whether to look away or pretend not to hear. "Not here," I said quietly and guided him outside to the parking lot. The moment the door closed behind us, he spun toward me, his anger sharp and wild. "You think you can just cut us off like that? The kids are suffering." His words came out like accusations, each one meant to sting. "They're your kids too," I replied evenly. He barked a humorless laugh. "Oh, so now you care about responsibility." Something inside me shifted, but not the way he expected. My tone stayed calm, steady. "You're right. I do care about responsibility. That's why I'm finally taking mine back." His face contorted, disbelief turning to rage. "You can't do this," he snapped. I met his eyes. I already did. And before he could speak again, I turned and walked away. The snow crunched beneath my boots, every step louder than his fury echoing behind me. 3 days passed before he reached out again. When the phone rang, I almost ignored it, but curiosity, or perhaps closure, made me answer. "Marissa," he said, his voice thin and strained. "We need to talk." I asked flatly, "About what?" He sighed, frustration bleeding through every syllable. "You've made things impossible for us. The kids." I cut him off. "Don't use them." He let out a heavy, performative breath. "Nora's falling apart. The kids are confused. You used to care." "I still do," I replied, my tone calm as ever. "That's why I stopped." For a long moment there was only silence. I thought he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, brittle and wounded. "You're not the person I thought you were." I almost laughed. "No," I said softly. "I'm not your wallet anymore." He cursed under his breath and hung up. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later there was pounding on my front door. Hard, frantic, the kind that shakes the frame before your thoughts can catch up. I looked through the peephole and saw Ethan's face, flushed and desperate. I hesitated but opened the door just enough to block it with my body. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He shoved a hand against the doorframe, eyes wild. "You need to stop this," he snapped. "You think cutting me off makes you some kind of hero? You're ruining my life." I folded my arms. "You've managed that well enough on your own." He stepped closer, voice shaking. "You have no idea what's happening. You can't just walk away from family." I almost smiled. "Family? Is that what we're calling it now? You called me a loser. And now suddenly I'm family again because the bills need paying?" His jaw clenched tight. Before he could respond, another voice broke through the cold. "Norris. Ethan, stop." He froze, turning toward her. She stood a few feet away, coat half-zipped, hair windblown, her face pale and tired. Behind her, the car engine hummed softly in the streetlight. "Nora, go home," he barked. She didn't move. "No," she said quietly. "We're done." He blinked, startled. "What are you talking about?" Her gaze shifted to me, then back to him. "I met with someone today. A lawyer." All color drained from his face. "You what?" "I know what you've been doing," she said. "The gambling, the lies, the hidden account." For the first time he had no words. I stayed silent, letting the moment unravel. Nora stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "All those payments Marissa sent, the ones you said went to the kids. I saw the bank records. You spent them at casinos." He turned toward me, desperate. "You told her." I shook my head slowly. "Didn't have to." Nora pulled a folder from her bag and held it up. "I did. And I gave copies to the lawyer. You can't hide it anymore." He lunged forward, but I stepped between them, my voice steady. "Don't." He froze, his breathing ragged. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted. "You think this makes you righteous?" I drew a slow breath, the icy air cutting through my lungs. "No," I said quietly. "It makes me free." He laughed again, but the sound cracked halfway. "You'll regret this," he warned. "You'll see what happens when I'm gone." Nora's voice came soft but unshaken. "We already have." He looked between us, realizing for the first time that neither of us feared him anymore. Then he turned, shoved his hands into his coat pockets, and stalked off down the snowy street. Nora stood trembling, her breath visible in the cold. I motioned her inside. She hesitated on the threshold like she wasn't sure she was allowed. "Come in," I said gently. "You don't need to explain." Inside, the air was warm and still. I poured her a cup of tea, cinnamon-scented and calming. She stared into it for a long moment, as though she could see the years she'd lost. "I should have said something that night," she whispered. "When they called you a loser. You were surviving," I said softly. "I understand." Tears welled in her eyes. "He kept saying you owed us, that you were lucky to have a family who needed you." I gave a faint smile at the irony. "That's the thing about people like Ethan. They call it family when they're taking and betrayal when you stop giving." She nodded slowly. "He's gone. I told him not to come home." "Do you have somewhere to stay?" I asked. She hesitated. "I'll figure it out." "You can stay here for now," I said. Her eyes widened. "You'd do that? After everything?" "I'm not helping him anymore," I said gently. "But I'll help you." That night, while Nora slept on my couch, I sat by the window watching the snow drift down, the city quiet beneath its white glow. For the first time in years, my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The next morning, my phone rang from an unknown number. "Ms. Lang," a man's voice said. "This is Gavin Reed. I'm Nora's lawyer. She gave me your contact information." "Is she all right?" I asked. "She's fine," he replied. "But there's something you should see. It concerns your brother's use of funds. I think you'll want to be involved." When I met Gavin later that day, he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts, transfers, withdrawals, casino receipts, hotel invoices. My money had built his double life. Nora's moving forward with the separation, Gavin said. She asked me to inform you in case Ethan tries to reach out again. I closed the folder slowly. If he tried again, I told myself I'd handle it. That evening, my phone began to glow with his name. I let it ring once, twice, then pressed silence, but the calls kept coming. Each vibration blurred into the next until it became a steady hum of anger and desperation. Finally, I answered. You ruined my family, Ethan shouted, his voice sharp with rage. She's leaving me because of you. No, I said quietly. She's leaving you because of you. He started to argue, but I cut him off. Listen carefully, I said. You used me. You lied. You called me a loser. Now you've lost everything, your wife, your kids, your home, and the comfort I used to provide. The only thing left for you is a choice. Stop or sink. There was silence on the other end. A long, hollow quiet that carried the weight of everything he refused to face. Then finally a click. The call ended. Outside my window, the snow had stopped. The world looked still and unmarked again, as if it had been waiting for this calm. By the end of the week, Nora and the kids had moved away, new state, new beginning. She sent me a photo of her sons building a snowman, their cheeks flushed red from the cold. Beneath it, she'd written, "Thank you for everything." I stared at that picture for a long time, smiling softly. For the first time, helping someone didn't feel like losing. Felt like quiet victory. Ethan never called again, but word found its way to me anyway. He'd lost his job, defaulted on his mortgage, and eventually ended up sleeping on a friend's couch, until that friend asked him to leave. Still, he blamed everyone but himself. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it or gloat. I simply deleted the last of our shared accounts, folded the final statement, and whispered to no one in particular, maybe losers are just people who finally stopped paying for everyone else's mistakes. February arrived quietly, soft and gray. The holiday lights had vanished from the streets, leaving the city bare but honest again. Nora and the children were settling into their new life up north. She sent small updates, pictures of snowmen, messy stacks of pancakes, drawings taped to unfamiliar walls. Each one felt like proof that she could finally breathe. Ethan, meanwhile, had disappeared into the kind of silence that only follows destruction. My mother called once, her tone clipped, defensive. "You've made things difficult for your brother," she said. "He's not himself." I almost laughed. Maybe now he finally is. She exhaled a long, weary sigh and hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of guilt pressing on my chest. I'd spent years mistaking sacrifice for love, draining myself dry under the illusion that good daughters are supposed to. But love isn't a debt, and family isn't defined by who you keep rescuing. Sleep came easier after that. The air in my apartment felt lighter, and the silence that once echoed like judgment now sounded like peace. On weekends, I walked past the bakery where my mother used to take us as children. The smell of cinnamon no longer hurt. It reminded me that sweetness could exist without obligation. A week later, another envelope arrived from Nora's lawyer, Gavin Reed. Inside was a handwritten note from Nora. "We're safe now. You gave us that." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my desk drawer beside the last photograph I ever took of my family. I didn't keep it out of nostalgia. I kept it as proof, a reminder of what survival really looks like. One evening, as I stood by the window watching snow drift through the streetlights, I realized I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I didn't need one. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end quietly with peace. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the glass. For a fleeting moment, I saw my reflection, calm, steady, unrecognizable from the woman who once begged to belong. That was when I understood. The family I needed wasn't the one I lost. It was the one I had finally built within myself. A few weeks later, I dropped off the last box of Christmas decorations at a donation center. The clerk smiled and asked if I wanted a receipt. "No," I told her, returning the smile. I already kept what mattered, the lesson. Driving home, I passed my parents' street. Their house looked smaller now, like a stage after the final curtain had fallen. I didn't stop. I only slowed long enough to notice the same porch light that had glared in my face that night. For a moment I wondered if they still talked about me. If they called me selfish or heartless. Maybe they did. Maybe they always would. But I wasn't a loser. I was finally free. I parked in front of my apartment, stepped out into the cold and looked up at the sky. Snow was falling again, soft, steady, clean. If you've ever had to walk away from people who mistook your kindness for weakness, you know this feeling. Share your story. Someone out there needs to hear it.